Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne, if I may, there was the one that I noted earlier, which is that Supervisor Campos's legislation proposes to expand the private right of action to allow private parties to sue hosting platforms for violations of Chapter 41A. Currently, and under both Supervisor Kim's and Supervisor Farrell's legislation, the only private rights of action are available are against owners or tenants or business entities who are actually the ones leasing the unit for short-term rental. So that is a difference in Supervisor Campos's ordinance that's not in the current code or the other proposed ordinances. So I would recommend voting on whether you recommend expanding the private right of action to allow actions against hosting platforms or not.
Yes.
Is this for the next item or this?
I actually want to address that and also on the next item. So it sounds like we just voted on our added recommendation 19. I was going to bring up to City Attorney Marlena Byrne's comment. That was actually something that was on the list. I heard also a couple different people say that. So I think we will address that when it's time to do the round robin of what else do we want to add. And I wanted to ask, I guess, the commission and also the secretary, we talked about being able to go back to other votes. Are we doing that, or is that where we are in this process?
If I suppose there was the desire by the commission, we could revisit any one of the recommendations and revote that.
I don't have to revote it. I just wanted to go back based on item 12 and various other items, which I will discuss. I wanted to change my vote on item 6. I have my reasoning for that, and I didn't know if it was time to do that yet. Are we just going to do the round robin through all of them?
I believe now would be the opportunity for commissioners to talk about their own ideas for amendments and modifications and recommendations to the full board.
Correct.
And then based on that conversation, if someone wants to revisit, we can do so through the chair.
Why don't we do this the same way we open this up? And if you have another addition, comment, afterthought, inclusion, deletion, change, now's the time to do it. Commissioner Antonini.
Well, I just wanted to go back to what Mr. Starr just brought up. Briefly, there was part of Campos's legislation that isn't on the other ones, is this expanding private right of action against platforms in addition to hosts. And I'm against that, of course. Should we vote on that? It is.
You should vote on it. It was outlined in the before and after, but it wasn't called out as a specific recommendation. I'm sorry about that. So right now, individual party, they can only take action against the owner or business entity, and it would add now hosting platforms to that. So it would expand the private right of action for that.
No, I would be against that. They're not the one who's actually, it's not their property. I mean, they're the expediter. They're involved in the process, but they're not the one who's violating the code by not following the laws, and it's the host or the entity.
I think Campos's ordinance would place requirements on the hosting platform such that they did have requirements under Section 41A. You voted to require them to put a number on it and verify the number was accurate, and but you voted against requiring them to do quarterly reporting. So if you did include the hosting platform, a violation would be not putting the number on. Am I correct on that? Yeah.
Correct. And there's also an existing obligation under the code for the hosting platforms to provide notice to any users that San Francisco regulates short-term rentals. So presumably the items that a hosting platform would be liable for under this private right of action would be failure to provide that notice, failure to verify the registration number is valid, and if it, although it's not your recommendation, if it were included in the ordinance, failure to comply with the reporting requirements.
Yeah, I understand that, but I think it's up to the city to enforce these things, and if the platforms don't put the number in, if that holds up as part of the thing, then it's up to the city to enforce that, not anybody else who happens to want to take a private right of action, because it would expand it to a lot of other groups that are getting involved in a process that I don't think it's appropriate they be involved in, especially against the platform. So I'm against this.
If the commission wants it, it would probably be a good time to vote on this item if you wanted to add on item 15.
It would
On
be
adding-
16, I think.
I'm sorry, we're on 16 now?
Well, this is a separate item, I guess.
This would be the 16th recommendation.
Okay, the 16th recommendation. So to add a hosting platform to who an interested party can seek civil action against would be the question, whether or not you wanted to add that.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Maybe the city attorney could help me phrase it.
So if you, clearly you've considered this and debated it, so if you do not want to make a recommendation, it would not get referred back to you because it's been before you and you've debated it. But if you would like to make a recommendation on this issue, someone could make a motion to recommend that hosting platforms be subject to the private right of action. Or you could make a motion in the converse that hosting platforms should not be subject to a private right of action.
Or nothing.
Or nothing.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you very much. So, for a lot of reasons, I just want to state this, and then we can just make it really quick. I'm going to change my support on item number 6. Right, recommendation number 6, we took a vote. Change the yes, the A to an A. I think at this point, since it's late, I do have and let me know, Secretary, if that's at issue. I have a couple of items that are on the list, so this might be really helpful because there were some things that people noted, and I wrote them down. And of course, if I missed anything, let me know. But it sounds like we had on private right of action, we had 3 items. It sounded like people were looking to not recommend that we allow a private right of action against hosting platforms, that we institute a longer time limit before private right of action can be taken, closer to 105 days, and that private rights of action allow damages but not civil penalties. So that's what I heard from various conversations. I'll throw those out there as recommendations, 17, 18, and 19, and then maybe correct.
One more time, please.
Yeah, so the first one was do not recommend that private rights of actions be allowed against hosting platforms. The second is allow a minimum 105-day limit before private right of action can be taken.
I'm sorry, what was the second one?
Minimum 105-day limit before private right of action can be taken. And we can take that minimum word out. I thought there was something about 105 days and then 30 days. And
So the timeline for the private right of action would track Supervisor Farrell's proposal.
yes.
Yeah.
So that would be the
Just the
recommendation.
timeline.
The timeline for private right of action following Supervisor Farrell's.
Well, so 105-day
Yeah.
prior to
Plus
private
30.
right of action.
Yes.
Prior to providing the city attorney's office and the department with 30 days notice of intent to file.
Well, let's go with
So
the
just
language
track
that's
the Farrell.
Track to Supervisor Farrell's recommendation on timeline for private right of action. And then the third one was private right of action can allow damages but not civil penalties. Except for the city, which can, I assume, take civil penalties. Open to correction on that, but that's what I heard and wrote down.
And just to clarify, you were rescinding or changing your vote on recommendation?
I'd really like
Yeah.
to, through the chair, reopen that vote as opposed to
sure.
piecemeal commissioners telling me which item is they're changing
Okay.
their vote on, just
Sure.
to make it clean.
Okay.
Okay.
So, Jonas, based on that, would you like to recall the vote on number 6 then?
Yes, please. So on recommendation number 6 regarding prohibiting hosting platforms from listing any unit that did not maintain good standing on the city's registry per the Campos ordinance, Commissioner Antonini,
No.
Commissioner Hillis,
This is item 6?
yes.
No.
Commissioner Johnson?
No.
Commissioner Moore?
Yes.
Commissioner Richards?
Yes.
Commissioner Wu?
Aye.
And Commission President Fong?
No.
No. So that recommendation will not move forward by a vote of 3-4 now, with Commissioners Antonini, Hillis, Johnson, and Fong voting against.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
Question
Commissioner
is, you said not moving forward. We are only reporting the relative weighting of the response. That is what we agreed to in the beginning. It is not saying we're switching it to yes or no.
Well, no. Each of these recommendations are going to be forwarded either with a recommendation of yes or no by the commission individually, and each of them, line item, will reflect the vote the commission took on each recommendation. And so this particular recommendation on item 6 will now reflect a vote of 3-4.
Correct. Then, okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
Okay.
Yes.
On your 3 items, is there anybody else who wants to discuss that, feel that it's worthy of taking a vote on or making just a recommendation on? Commissioner Moore?
I like to say that given the hour, it is extremely difficult to, on the run, have the clarity and the undivided attention to vote on something which I'm not prepared to fully discuss at this moment. I've been sitting here for almost 12 hours, and I'm just at my limit. And I think we are doing ourselves a favor if there are additional recommendations, either to defer them to a further in-depth discussion, or individually make suggestions or engage in ongoing comment. And I think there could be a lot of extra thoughtfulness. I just don't have it to spend any more time on inventing something. I'm sorry to using that negative word, to take it any further.
Commissioner Antonini?
Well, I'm fine with them because I think 16 was just commenting on part of Campos's legislation, and we're not supporting the expansion of private right of action against platforms in addition to hosts. And then we already discussed the thing about the limit being a longer limit because it tracks the administrative action, or we've already got the other one in place that would make it the shorter limit. And then the third one I'm not as sure about with the private right of action, damages, not civil penalties, but I'm supportive of all 3.
Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you. I'll ask, I'll put it to maybe the commission secretary or and the staff whether or not we need to do what we did for the previous recommendations and take a vote. I do think we need to at least discuss it because it's not being something that's sort of invented, not to continue using that negative word right now. People have had these thoughts, and the whole purpose was to come back at the end and add anything else, any other thoughts we had.
Right. You've had the opportunity to discuss it, so it wouldn't have to come back to you. But if you want the board of supervisors to understand your position, I would take a vote. You could maybe take a vote on all 3 if there's consensus that you only need to take one vote, or you could split them out individually.
Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne, because these items amend the administrative code, they're on a 30-day referral to this commission. So you have 30 days from the date they were, the ordinances were referred to you, which tracks for Supervisor Campos's ordinance. I know that was introduced on April 14th. I believe Supervisor Farrell's ordinance was introduced on April 7th. Is that?
It's only the final ordinance, I believe. So Campos was introduced last week.
Yes, on April 14th.
Okay, and then Farrell's was also on April. No, Campos was done this week.
A substitute ordinance was introduced this week, but that does not start a new 30-day clock. The original signed ordinance that was signed and approved as to form by our office was introduced by Supervisor Campos on April 14th, and I believe Supervisor Farrell's was a week before.
The
same day?
I'll defer to you, but my understanding is when they submit a revised ordinance, it starts the 30-day clock, and that's the advice I've been given from the clerk of the board's office.
I confirmed that with the clerk's office this week, and it does not start a new 30-day clock. So they are both tracking from April 14th as the 30-day.
We should probably clarify that with them.
You're not suggesting we continue the matter to...
I'm not suggesting anything. I just want to make the commission aware of how much time they have to review this before they would not be able to voice an opinion on it.
You just have 3 more, so I would just
Well, for my clarification, we're not taking a vote on the recommendation 16 that was proposed regarding hosting platforms subject to PR.
That's part of R3.
There's nothing to subject them to. They have no way of, we have nothing to do with
Okay,
it.
so that was just discussed. And
Number
put to
6
bed.
lost.
Sorry, I missed that. Okay.
I'm sorry, I thought the recommendation for 16 would be to recommend that hosting platforms not be included in the private right of action.
Yes.
Right, yes.
We never voted on it,
never-
though.
No, it has not been voted on yet. That was one
Okay.
of the three that Commissioner Johnson just raised.
Okay.
Commissioner Richards.
Again, I don't know what private rights of action would actually even be existing at this point because there's nothing to take any action on. I mean,
Notifying those.
Under Supervisor Campos,
Other
under
notification.
existing code, assuming a private right of action were created against hosting platforms, they could be sued for failure to provide the required notice to all users that San Francisco regulates short-term rentals
Okay.
under our administrative code. Under Supervisor Campos's ordinance, that remains in place. In addition, they would have a reporting requirement to the city where they'd have to submit data to the city, which you voted not to recommend, but it could pass. And they also, hosting platforms would be required to verify the registration number. So if they included a registration number that was unverified or was incorrect, then presumably that would be something they could be sued for under the private right
thank
of
you for
action.
clarification. I'd like to vote on that.
Shall I call the question
Are you prepared?
Yeah, and all 3.
on all 3? Is everybody good for all 3? Should we call them individually?
Individual.
Well,
But why don't we stay consistent and do them individually, just for matter, it's just for consistency's sake. So on the recommendation to not recommend a private right of action to be allowed against platform.
Time out. I spent a lot of time preparing for this hearing, and this thing is great. It probably adds to the enforcement, but I'm not prepared to vote on that. I wanted to ask, can we make a recommendation, an advisement? And all of us, agree that this needs to be studied further.
We are smart in ourselves.
I think Commissioner Moore's right at this hour to add things that we haven't really, I know we discussed this, but.
So if I could add some thoughts.
Please.
I tend to agree. I think what's important is that we've discussed it. We've clearly had a discussion. Everything that the staff tells the Board of Supervisors from this hearing is a recommendation. There's no recommendation to recommend. And so I believe that the discussion is what's important.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. I agree. I think this is a little bit different than making sure that our voices were heard on the specific recommendations, but I'm okay with just a laundry list. And if that's the case, I'll just add one more to the list and maybe we can close it out. I know Commissioner Hill has said that he would want to say that if it was possible that hosted and non-hosted days were not combined, then you would want to make a difference between hosted and non-hosted rentals in terms of the number of days cap. I know that he said that, and I want to add that to the list if we're just making a complete list of recommendations.
So just to clarify, so I'm clear on what the commission is doing, and for the sake of the public also. So you've made very specific recommendations of all these items 1 through 15, I believe it was.
Yes.
Of a yes or a no.
Right.
So the suggestion now is for these remaining items, you not make a recommendation and just list these additional items were discussed without recommendation.
Correct.
Okay.
That's okay.
And I would just want to remind the commission that these items would not be referred back if they get included or do not get included. And all of these ones that you raised actually are already included in the pending legislation. So you will not, after 30 days from the date of introduction, have another opportunity to discuss them or to give a recommendation, rather.
So moving, just for clarity, the following 4 items forward as items that were discussed by the commission with no recommendation is the private right of action to be allowed against platforms, the Supervisor Farrell timeline for private rights of action, and damages cannot be civil penalties with exception to the city, and finally the hosted versus non-hosted differentiation of total number of days.
So,
Thank you, commissioners. Is that a wrap?
I think so.
Okay, so we do have one more action item for you.